The men arrived before dawn had fully committed to itself. 3 riders and a covered buggy, pushing up the creek road through a cold that still held the shape of night. Della heard the wheels before she saw the lanterns. She was already dressed, the slate blue dress buttoned to the collar, the dark canvas apron tied at the waist, with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste motion in the early hours. She stepped out onto the porch and watched them come. The riders pulled up at the gate. 2 of them sat their horses with the patient looseness of men who were paid to wait and were comfortable doing it. The 3rd dismounted and stood at the fence post, not speaking, just present, the way a door is present when it is blocking a corridor. The buggy stopped behind them, and Silas Crum stepped down. He was a composed man, Silas Crum, silver-haired, brass-buttoned, the kind of man whose watch chain caught light where none seemed to exist. He held a folded document in one hand and tapped it twice against his palm as he looked over the property with the slow, evaluating patience of a buyer who had already decided on a price and was simply allowing the seller time to arrive at the same conclusion. He did not look at Della until he had finished looking at everything else. "Mrs. Lund," he said. He made it sound like a courtesy. She came to the top step and kept both hands at her sides. Her honey-blonde hair was loose at the sides of her face in the wind, and the cold had put colour in her peach-fair cheeks, and her clear blue eyes did not move from his. "Mr. Crum," she said. He crossed the yard toward her with the unhurried confidence of a man who had made this walk before and found it unremarkable. When he reached the foot of the steps, he held out the document. "I trust you received the letter in August." She had. It was in the kitchen, beneath the coffee pot, because she had not known what else to do with a thing she could not fully read. The legal language was dense and specific, in the way that legal language becomes when it is designed to obscure rather than inform. She took the document from him now. She unfolded it. She found the date and the number at the bottom of the first page, and let neither of those things show in her face. 4 days. "My husband never spoke of this debt to me," she said. Crum's mouth formed the shape of sympathy without the content of it. "Men often keep such things quiet. I am sorry for it. But the note carries Joran's signature, and the collateral listed is this property, and the instrument has matured." He paused. "I am prepared to offer you a fair market price, more than fair. You could be in Millhaven by the end of the month." "I'm not going to Millhaven." He regarded her for a moment. Then he buttoned the top button of his coat with patient fingers, as if the conversation had simply moved into a different phase rather than ending. 4 days, Mrs. Lund," he said. He turned back toward the buggy. One of the riders shifted in the saddle. The 3rd man at the fence post watched her with a flat, incurious attention that was somehow worse than hostility. Then they were moving, wheels on the frozen creek road, hooves receding, and the cold yard was empty again, and Della was standing on the porch steps with a document she could not fully read, and 4 days in which to do something she did not yet know how to do. She went inside. She sat down at the kitchen table. She spread the document flat with both hands and read every word of it twice, passing the ones she understood and circling the ones she did not. When she was done, she made coffee, not because she wanted it, but because the body insists on its ordinary functions regardless of what else is happening to it. Joran had been dead 8 months. He had died the way men die in spring, unexpectedly, on a slope he had crossed 100 times. The ranch had become hers in a formal sense, a legal sense, a document sense. What it had not become was manageable. Not yet, not entirely. She had held it together through summer with her own hands and a will she would not have named as exceptional because it had simply been necessary. The horses were fed, the fence line held, the winter stores were laid in and accounted for. She had believed, through all of it, that the land was solid beneath her. That was the thing she had believed most firmly, and that Crum's visit had most quietly taken from her. She needed a lawyer or someone who could read what the document actually said, or someone who had known Joran long enough to know whether he had ever, in any context, borrowed money from Silas Crum, or any instrument connected to him. She had none of those things. What she had was a list of what she did not have, growing longer in the margin of the document. It was mid-afternoon when she rode to town. Holt Creek was a 3-mile road of hard-packed caliche that ran between low hills still brown from summer drought. The sky above it was the pale, flat grey of a day that had considered weather and decided against it. Della rode in the slate-blue dress with her apron rolled and tied behind the saddle because she had not had time or reason to change, and the cold wind off the ridge pulled her honey-blonde hair loose from its pins, and she let it go. The lawyer's office was above the feed store, behind a door with a painted sign that had faded to the point of suggestion. The lawyer himself, a tired, long-nosed man named Pryor, took the document from her, read it in silence, and set it down on his desk, with the careful deliberateness of a man placing a thing he would rather not touch. "The signature is your husband's?" he asked. "I believe so." "Then the instrument is likely legitimate." He folded his hands. "The question is whether the underlying debt is what it claims to be, or whether this is a constructed instrument. That would require examination of Crum's originating ledgers, which he has no obligation to produce unless compelled by a court." "Can we compel a court in 4 days?" Pryor's expression answered before he did. She rode home in the growing dark, with nothing she had not ridden in with, except a precise understanding of how difficult her situation was. That was not nothing, but it was a long way from enough. She was mending fence on the east pasture the following morning, when she heard the horse on the hill road. The hill road was not used anymore, not since the bridge over Pine Creek had washed out 2 springs back. It was slow-going and rough in places, the kind of road a person took when they did not want to be seen taking the main road, or when they had come from a direction the main road did not reach. She straightened and shaded her eyes against the pale morning light. He came out of the scrub oak at the ridge line, with the unhurried pace of a man who had been travelling a long time, and had stopped requiring the journey to be comfortable. Tall in the saddle, long-armed, a trail duster the colour of old creek mud pushed back from a faded blue shirt. His hat was pushed back from his forehead, and the dusty brown hair beneath it was overgrown and careless. He was keeping both hands visible on the saddle horn in that particular way some men have, not performatively, just honestly, as if he understood that arriving unannounced at a lone woman's fence line required a vocabulary of gesture rather than words. He pulled up at the fence and looked down at her. Dark green eyes. Quiet. Rarely blinking. "Morning," he said. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking for water for the horse, and a chance to ask if there's work." Della regarded him for a long moment. The wind moved her loose hair across her face, and she pushed it back. "There's a trough at the barn," she said. "Come around the gate." His name was Cal. He said it simply, without a surname, which was common enough on the frontier roads that it raised no particular question. He watered his horse with the quiet efficiency of a man who put the animal first without being asked to, and then he stood at the barn door and looked at the fence line and the cold garden and the house, and said nothing that was not directly useful. "What kind of work?" she asked. "Whatever needs doing." She studied him. The hands visible on the saddle horn, the trail duster that had been dark once and was now the colour of distance, the way he waited for her answer without pressing it. "I can offer a meal and the barn loft," she said. "That's all I have right now." "That's enough," he said. She would not understand until much later what that answer had cost him to give, or what it had set in motion. He worked without being directed, which she noticed. He identified the failing sections of fence by walking the line at first light, before she was out of the house, and had 2 of them repaired before she brought him coffee. He restrung the corral gate that had been dragging for 6 weeks. He split a cord of wood and stacked it against the north side of the barn without being asked and without mentioning that he had done it. He ate at the kitchen table across from her that evening with the quiet, contained attention of a man who had grown accustomed to his own company and found the presence of another person's silence more restful than their conversation. Della, who had also grown accustomed to her own company, found this easier than she would have predicted. "You know this country?" she asked. "Some of it. Do you know Silas Crum?" He looked at his coffee cup for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I know of him," he said. "What's he done?" She told him. She laid it out plainly, the document, the debt, Joran's signature, the 4 days now reduced to 3, Pryor's assessment, the wall of legal procedure that stood between her and any relief. Cal listened without interrupting, which was a quality she had not been certain she would find in a man this far from everything. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does anyone in this town know Crum's business well enough to know whether the debt was real?" His former clerk left for Millhaven 2 years ago, a man named Arbet. Millhaven is a day and a half. "I know it. So is there someone who could ride today?" She looked at him across the table in the lamplight. The dark green eyes were steady and direct, and there was nothing in them that asked for credit for the question. He was simply looking at the problem from all its angles, the way a man looks at a section of damaged fence, not to impress her, just to see it whole. "You'd have to be back by the morning of the 4th day," she said. "I understand that. I can't pay you for it. I know that too." The trouble was not finished. It had only paused, and both of them understood it. He left before sunup the next morning on the roan mare, with 2 days of biscuit in his coat pocket, and the name Arbet written on a folded paper she had pressed into his hand at the barn door. Della watched him go up the hill road, the long, rangy figure growing smaller against the pale ridge, and then she went back inside and worked. She worked the way she always worked when fear was close, efficiently, specifically, task by task, as if competence were a form of argument. She moved the winter stores to the back of the root cellar to protect them from a possible forced entry. She copied out the contents of the document by hand into her own ledger, in her own words, because a record she had made herself felt more defensible than one made by someone else. She wrote a letter to her sister in Lawrence, not because her sister could help, but because the act of describing the situation to someone she loved made it feel less like a verdict. She did not let herself think about what would happen if Cal did not come back. That particular door she kept firmly closed. He came back in the late afternoon of the 3rd day. She heard the horse on the hill road, and she was at the barn door before he had cleared the ridge. He rode down with the same unhurried pace he had arrived with, but there was something different in the set of his shoulders now, a deliberateness, a direction, as if the riding had given him something to carry. He dismounted at the fence. He reached into his coat and brought out a folded paper, thicker than the one she had given him. "Arbet kept his copy of Crum's originating ledger when he left," Cal said. "He was waiting for someone to ask about it." She took the paper. It was a careful hand, columns of figures, dates, notations. She found Joran's name in the 2nd column. The amount beside it was half what Crum's document claimed. The date was 18 months before the note Crum had presented. "The debt was real," Cal said, "but it was settled. Joran paid it in lumber and fence wire 16 months ago. Arbet witnessed it. He signed a statement." She looked up from the paper. The wind was cold, and the light was going, and her clear blue eyes were very bright. "Crum manufactured the matured instrument," Cal said. "The original debt was closed. What he brought you was a second claim built on the same note, dressed in legal language and brought to a widow who had no one to read it with her. He said it plainly. He did not soften it or harden it. He said it the way you tell a person the specific shape of the thing they are dealing with, so they can decide what to do with it." Della folded Arbet's letter carefully and placed it inside her own ledger. "We take this to Pryor," she said. "Tonight," Cal said, "before Crum moves first." Pryor received them at his kitchen table at 7 in the evening, with the quiet alertness of a man who had been waiting for the other side of a story. He read Arbett's statement twice. He read the ledger extract. He looked at the column of figures and the date and the witnessing signature, and then he set the papers down and folded his hands. "I can file an injunction in the morning that will freeze any action on the property pending examination," he said, "and I can send a rider to the circuit judge tonight." "Will it hold?" Della asked. "It will hold long enough for this to become public," Pryor said, "and that is all it needs to do." What came next was not what Crum had prepared for. The injunction was filed at first light. The circuit judge arrived by midday, summoned by a rider Pryor had sent in the dark hours before dawn. By afternoon, a gathering had formed in front of the courthouse steps. Not a mob, not a celebration, but the particular quiet assembly of a small-town population that has learned something about a man they had been required to trust. Crum arrived in his dark wool coat and brass buttons, and he brought his own lawyer. And his lawyer read from a document with the confidence of a man who expects documents to do what they were designed to do. And then Pryor read from Arbett's statement. And then the circuit judge asked for the originating ledger, the real one, not the constructed instrument. And Crum's lawyer had a long moment of silence in which the quality of the afternoon changed entirely. The claim was voided. The injunction became permanent. Crum's lawyer gathered his papers with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had no interest in being present when the assembled faces turned toward his client. Della stood on the courthouse steps in her slate-blue dress, with the wind pulling her honey-blonde hair across her face, and did not look at Silas Crum as he passed. She did not need to look at him. He was already diminished, not by force, not by a gun in anyone's hand, but by a column of figures in a clerk's careful handwriting, witnessed and signed and carried, 2 days hard riding through cold country, by a man who had said a meal in a barn loft was enough. She thought, standing there, of the way Cal had said that. That's enough. As if enough were a simple thing. He was at the barn when she got back, working on the corral gate he had already fixed once, and was now making better. The roan mare was in the paddock, with her head over the fence rail, watching him. The sun was low and orange, and the cold had the particular clarity of an autumn evening that has decided to be beautiful rather than harsh. Della stopped at the paddock fence and watched him work. "You could have left," she said. "When I couldn't pay you, you could have ridden on." Cal fitted the gate hinge into place and tested the swing of it. It moved clean and true. He said nothing for a moment. "I thought about it," he said finally. She waited. "I've been moving for 3 years," he said. "Since the war, one way or another. This valley." He paused. "I don't know. Something about it." It was not a declaration. It was barely an admission. But it was more than he had said about himself in all the days combined, and she understood that it had cost him something to say it. The man who kept his hands visible, who moved through the world with the practiced invisibility of someone who had decided not to want anything he might not be able to keep. "The gate's fixed," she said. "The fence will hold through winter." "Yes," he said. "The wood's stacked." "Yes." She looked at him across the fence rail in the last of the orange light. "I could use a hand through spring," she said, "if you're not needed elsewhere." Cal looked at the gate, tested the swing of it again, once. Then he looked at her. The dark green eyes were quiet and direct, and there was something in them now that had not been there on the hill road. Not warmth exactly, or not only warmth, but something more careful and more deliberate. Something chosen. "I'm not needed elsewhere," he said. The cold came down off the ridge as the sun dropped, and the paddock was still, and the roan mare breathed in small white clouds, and somewhere in the oak scrub a bird called once, and then was quiet. 2 sets of boot prints in the dust led away from the barn toward the lit window of the house, the ground hard and even, the cold settling over everything like a clean sheet laid flat.